Hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. Today's topic is subliminal messages.
Yep. So subliminal messages we thought would be a really cool topic to do because we know a lot of people have heard about it, including ourselves, but we never knew exactly what it is and how it works. So we thought it'd be a really good topic. And in this video, we're going to be showing you examples, explaining about it, going into how it affects the mind, all that important stuff.
Yeah, so remember, we're not experts, but we have been researching this topic for the past 4 days.
As usual, yeah. So at the end, hopefully we can come to a conclusion and teach you a bit about this topic as well as learn a lot ourselves. So hopefully you enjoy.
Let's begin. So to understand subliminal messages, first we need to understand what a subliminal message actually is. So the definition from dictionary.com says,
A subliminal message is a technique used in marketing and other media to influence people without their being aware of what the messenger is doing. This may involve the use of split-second flashes of text, hidden images, or subtle cues that affect the audience at a level below conscious awareness. So let's break this down. Firstly, subliminal means something that is operating below the threshold of consciousness. This basically means that we aren't aware of it consciously, but subconsciously we're aware of it. So it shows some simple examples of how this is used in marketing. They also say that this is used in marketing, but later in the video we'll find out that it's not just used for that and it can be used for a variety of things. So the first example they use is flashes of text. So the way this works is basically say in like a 30-second ad, they're advertising to basically I don't know, buy socks. And on the screen, you don't really pay much attention to it. You're just watching it like, oh yeah, cool. But on the screen, they're basically multiple flashes saying buy socks. And well, you may think, well, it's obviously I'm just going to see the writing of the text that says buy socks. But the way this works is basically they put it for like 1 millisecond put up, and the conscious mind can only interpret something for it has to be up there for 13 milliseconds. And so they put it so fast that you aren't actually aware of it consciously, but your subconscious interprets it. So basically, and it's like using repetition. So all you can see is buy socks. And then all of a sudden, consciously, you start thinking, oh, maybe I should buy socks. And that's basically the way this technique works.
so an early real life example of this is in 1957, there was this guy, basically he worked at the cinemas, and basically the experiment was while the movie was playing for a split second, he would put things on the screen such as buy Coca-Cola, get popcorn and things like that, and he'd play it multiple times throughout the movie for repetition. And basically what he found was that popcorn went up, the sales went up by 18%, maybe a bit more, and popcorn and Coca-Cola sales went up by over 50%.
And remember that no one could actually see the text as they made it super fast, and it was only you're only aware of it in your subconscious mind. And basically, what they did with this is he started like talking about it, but then they did tests on it, and they also asked him for evidence or his basically research, and there was no evidence on it. So basically, they dismissed it.
Yeah, so there was outrage, and subliminal messages were actually banned across the country. Maybe now probably across the whole world. But from then on, in 1958, it was banned because people didn't like the idea of mind manipulation to get them to buy things.
Even though they didn't exactly, well, they say they didn't exactly know if it worked or it was actually a thing, but they banned it either way.
Yeah. So there was no strong evidence backing it up, but that is an example if you take his word. So now we're going to talk about how the mind works with subliminal messages.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about the states of consciousness, and this is a very important part of the video. Now we're just going to explain for around 10 minutes all the states of consciousness, because later on when we're going to be talking about subliminal messages, you might not be able to understand, so we're going to go over this first. So now we're going to be talking about states of consciousness. So now let's talk about the three states of consciousness theory. So you may have seen or heard of the analogy of the iceberg in the sea, which was advocated by Sigmund Freud. He was a neurologist and was born in 1856 and died in 1939. He was famous because they called him the founding father of treating mental illness, and basically he was very famous for his theory of basically that childhood trauma has a great influence in your adult lives. And so he basically worked a lot with the mind. He was also very famous for his theory on consciousness, and that's what we're talking about here, obviously. So I'll read on. He quoted, "The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water." His theory was that the mind has three parts: the conscious, which is above water, the preconscious, just below the waterline, and the unconscious, which is way below and takes up the majority of the, in this case, the iceberg. So the majority of our mind. Still use his theories to date, and he was a very revolutionary person. So first, with the three stages of consciousness, let's talk about consciousness, the conscious mind. So the conscious mind is basically the part where we're aware of the outside world. So the outside world. So basically, only what we see around us. And we can't interpret many things. It's basically only what our mind chooses for us to see on an external level. So I just explained what the conscious mind is. There's not really much to it. So like I said, it's pretty much just like in the moment what's happening externally. But now this is more important. Let's talk about his theory on the preconscious mind.
So as you can see on the iceberg photo, the preconscious mind is just slightly below the sea level, and basically what the preconscious mind is it's say it could be a memory. Say you're walking down the supermarket or something, and all of a sudden you want to buy something and you're not sure why. It's because maybe something sparked a memory in your preconscious mind that made you remember it. So you know it. You know what you know. The preconscious mind is say it's holding the memory. You know the memory. You're not thinking of it currently, but you still know it. And your preconscious mind is kind of basically your holding space for what you know.
Yeah, it's not something like you did a long time ago, but you don't remember like at all. Like someone might bring it up and you just don't remember. You still have it as a memory, but you're just not thinking about it at the current moment. But the thing with like something with subliminal messages, that it basically brings back a memory or it triggers something that you may have heard. But you know about it, but you're not thinking about it at the current moment. That's what his theory of the preconscious mind was. Just saying, none of this stuff has any strong evidence because science knows very little about the subconscious and the unconscious mind, and basically this was his theory. But a lot of people saying, even though it's not proven, it could very well be true, and
Yeah.
he may have been far ahead of his time.
As of now, most scientists and people in this field agree that the unconscious, the preconscious, basically this format exists. Maybe not exactly how Freud explains it, but they do believe that these basically minds under your conscious minds exist. There's not as much evidence as we would like.
Yeah.
So there have been a lot of tests done.
So yeah, that's the preconscious mind. This is also very similar to the subconscious mind. This is just how they basically called it back in his time, but now it's a lot of time it's referred to subconscious mind. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but the thing is, now we're going to talk about the unconscious mind and his theory on it. That's a lot different from the subconscious mind, and a lot of people confuse them and just think, oh, it's the same thing, but it's really not. So basically, what his theory was on the unconscious mind is that it's not unlike the preconscious mind, it's not a memory that you're knowing of, and it's also not something that you're at the time conscious of, but it's even below that. So as you can see on the iceberg photo, it's the majority of the iceberg. So the majority of your mind is unconscious, and he says basically that's where all your sort of like old storage is held. So like for example, they did this test with it was called the technique was called priming. What they did, they got I'm not sure how many people, but basically there was like two groups. One
17 people.
17 people, but
yeah.
the one of the groups was basically there was this what was it? I think it was a photo or something.
It was basically this artwork that they needed to analyze, but half the group they didn't remember it, but they were a part of that study of that artwork.
17 years ago, they were shown that artwork and they analyzed it, but they didn't remember. Like some of them didn't remember they did that study, but they definitely don't remember what the artwork was or like what they thought of it. But basically, Freud's basically he was the one who held the experiment. And basically, the results were that the people who were a part of the experiment, who had been a part of it 2 decades ago, actually, basically, they got I can't remember the exact experiment, but
They got like these answers. They did a lot better on the test or on analyzing. They got much higher marks than the group that had never been a part of it.
and just were exposed to it then.
Even though the group that had been exposed to that artwork like 17 years ago, almost 2 decades ago, had seen it, they had no memory, like current memory of it, of that artwork. That was a test. They made sure they had no current memory of the artwork, but somehow they still did better at the test.
Yeah, so
That is a test basically proving that the unconscious mind basically controls all our conscious decisions.
it doesn't 100% prove, but basically
There are much more
Froude's conclusion was that even though they didn't remember it or weren't conscious about it at the very moment, they still basically remembered it because basically their unconscious mind. And he basically like showed that our unconscious mind can contradict basically our decisions
in our conscious mind.
in our conscious reality, in our percepted reality. So yeah, and also with the unconscious mind, there was this video I watched. I can't remember his name, unfortunately. I might put it up on the screen, probably not. Basically, he was he does a lot of research on this guy, and he's a big professor in this field. And he says basically how he explains some examples of how our unconscious mind basically changes our behavior and decisions that we make, even though we're not aware of it. Basically, he explains that Froude's theory was that nothing happens by accident, and everything happens for a reason. He set an example basically
for himself.
Yeah,
his own personal experience.
He got up early to go to work, and when it was still very dark, so everyone was sleeping, but it was early in the morning. He went to his car and he went to unlock his car, but instead of pressing unlock, he double clicked the lock button. He doesn't know why. He thought it was just an accident, and basically his car alarm went off, and basically woke his neighbors. So initially he thought that this must just be an accident, but then he remembered Freud basically saying nothing happened for a reason. He said, well, I must have been angry at my neighbors to basically make me want to wake them up, even though consciously he didn't want to like do anything. He was just going to work. He thought it was an accident. He basically what he's saying is that say these accidents happen, it's because unconsciously there's a reason for it. In that case, he might have been angry at one of his neighbors, and unconsciously, even though he wasn't mad at the moment, he didn't want to cause any harm. He basically unconsciously his unconscious mind made his conscious mind basically make the alarm go on, even though he didn't mean to do it. So that's a really good example, I thought, of how it affects your behavior.
Yeah, and that could explain, if this is true, this could explain so many things on why all these bad things happen and all the things. It could be because of your conscious mind and how it affects your, that's why because Froude's theory was originally that childhood trauma could affect your adult life, and that's what we're saying with long-term memories. Basically, and the established theory now for what people believe, most scientists and people on this topic have come to agreement that it may be not from childhood trauma, but basically just some sort of, because they haven't come up with their own explanation, but they haven't seen enough evidence in his theory, but they definitely do come to the agreement there is an unconscious mind. But they as of now, they don't know for sure why and how the unconscious mind actually affects the conscious mind, but they have seen so many tests done in the newer age that prove it. But it's like
they don't really know the science behind it. And the thing is, when we talk about how childhood trauma or not trauma, basically something that happens in your childhood or even your younger years, the thing is, children, especially younger children, are they're very susceptible to new information, and they can be persuaded very easily, and basically whatever they learn from a young age basically affects them from when they get older. So it's also like with school, what they learn in school could also have an effect of what happens later on, So if they're always learning, how to do things one way, they're not going to know any other way because that's all they know, and they're subconsciously programmed, which is a very important word in this topic, in this argument, is they're subconsciously programmed to do these things. And that's the thing with subliminal messaging, which we'll get onto in a moment, that basically with these things, you see them subconsciously, and basically they program you to basically when you see something associated with that, it triggers a memory.
Okay, so now we've got to wrap up the three states of consciousness. Hopefully, that wasn't too hard to understand, as this topic of the consciousness is a bit new to us.
And it's quite
It may have,
complicated.
yeah, it may have sounded a bit messy and repetitive, but hopefully you could understand. So now, as we just talked about towards the end of this consciousness, we talked about how subliminal messages basically work with the conscious, preconscious, unconscious mind. So now to see exactly which part of the mind subliminal messages work with, we've got to show you a 5-minute video, maybe 6-minute video on basically which part of your mind subliminal messages go for and how it can change your behavior.
And he's also got to he's got to identify a lot of questions and basically confusion around this topic that we haven't mentioned yet. So we just got to play it now.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, do subliminal messages affect human behavior? Now, to understand this issue, we need to understand the theory of the conscious mind. So if we look at psychodynamic theory, for example, we have the mind divided into the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious. So the conscious mind contains what we're aware of right now. The subconscious mind contains information that we could be aware of. It's readily available. And the unconscious mind contains information that we can't get to. Although the theory is that information stored in the unconscious mind can influence our behavior. So when it comes to the word subliminal, what this really means is below the threshold to be detected by the conscious mind. So it's below what's called the absolute threshold level. So these are typically visual or auditory messages that are presented in a way, like flashed quickly on a screen, that they're below the absolute threshold level. That's subliminal. And the idea here is that the subconscious picks up this stimulus and it influences human behavior. So it's not consciously detected, it can't be by definition, but the subconscious takes this information, it processes it, and we still act on it in some way. There's still a human behavior associated with it. Now there's also something called supraliminal. And supraliminal messages are messages that we can detect. They're above the absolute threshold level. We can detect them with our conscious mind. Now, what's interesting about supraliminal is it doesn't speak to priority, meaning if there's a supraliminal message in our environment, we can detect it with our conscious mind. We're aware of it, but we don't necessarily prioritize it. It can still be in the background. We can store a lot of information in our conscious awareness. So when we talk about this issue of subliminal messages, I think what gets confused here is sometimes we're really talking about supraliminal messages. So let's look at an example from a study. There was a study about wine sales done in the UK. And there were German and French wines that were for sale in the store. Now the price of these wines were the same. And on one day they would play German music in the store and another day French music. And what they found is that on days when they played German music, above 70% of the wine purchased was the German wine. And the same thing for the French music and the French wine, the same effect. Now this was touted by some as proof that subliminal messages really work. They really influence human behavior. But when we're talking about music in the background in a store, we're really talking about supraliminal messages. Yes, a lot of the people that purchase wine, most of the people that purchase the wine, who answered a survey after the wine purchase, indicated the music didn't influence their selection. So there was this idea that it was in the background, but it was still supraliminal. They could still hear it. They just didn't prioritize it. They were paying attention to the wine or other elements of the environment or other cognitive processes and not the background music. So they may not have pushed it as a priority in terms of what they were thinking about, but it was supraliminal. So when we talk about true subliminal messages, a lot of times we are talking about words on a screen that flash really quickly. And when I say quickly, I mean quite quickly, around 0.003 seconds. That's the duration of a word flashing on a screen that's typically agreed upon as being subliminal. So that's 3/1000ths of a second. Now, there are some studies that show that subliminal messages, as opposed to supraliminal, we know supraliminal messages do tend to affect behavior, but subliminal messages affect behavior as well. Now, generally, there hasn't been a strong effect identified here, meaning the effect size is small. These aren't important changes that we're seeing based on subliminal messages. And many people believe, of course, that there's no effect of subliminal messages, meaning that we have seen some studies that show an effect, but the research methodology there wasn't solid, or random error produced those results. Or what we're measuring isn't correct. There's a lot of measurement errors that are theorized in terms of some of these studies. So what's the truth? Well, we don't really know. It doesn't appear that subliminal messaging has an effect on human behavior, or if it does, it seems like it's a small effect. I think that the issues that are brought up with some of these studies that show an effect seem fairly legitimate. A lot of these studies confuse subliminal with supraliminal. There are a few studies, a lot of times the sample sizes are small, and there appears to be questionable methodology and unclear measurement involved in a lot of these studies. Still, there are a number of studies that show that subliminal messaging has some effect.
All right, so you just saw that video. It was pretty interesting. He gave a lot of good points and explains it in a lot of detail. So first, let's start about how he talked about supraliminal messages, because that's the for me the standout part of this video. So he basically says that supraliminal messages, unlike subliminal messages, we are aware of it, but it's basically not what the focal point is at, not what we're currently focusing on. That's also sort of what we were talking about, the preconscious mind. So it seems to me that just to say it straight away, that supraliminal messages are basically affected more towards our preconscious mind. So we are aware of it. But the thing is, it's a tricky one, because with subliminal messages, sometimes we are aware of it, but just because we can't see it. So it's a bit of a tricky one. But with supraliminal messages, he's saying that we are aware of it, but we're just not focusing on it. So it's in a way, it's above our level, the threshold of consciousness, and it's below at the same time. So with this, he's basically saying that it does affect, and that the people, he used a wine example, did actually buy the wine that of the nationality, that the country that the music was playing from. So it does show. But like he said, they did say that they didn't think about it when they bought it, and it didn't affect them. But like we said with the car keys, he didn't mean to, accidentally put the alarm on and wake the neighbor's family, but he did. Same with this thing. Like when they're choosing wine, like, oh, I don't know, I'll probably just go with this one for whatever reason. But subconsciously or preconsciously, they had that association with the music and the wine. So it is pretty decent proof that supraliminal messages do affect us.
Yeah, so he said a lot of people get confused with subliminal and supraliminal. But supraliminal and subliminal can both be used in advertising. As we said earlier, from the popcorn experiment, it was banned around a year later. So you can't use subliminal messages. Not that that's stopping big corporations if they needed to do it, but they banned it. But we see a lot of, if you search up subliminal messages in ads and logos, you'll find them. But those are actually supraliminal because they're visible. So supraliminal messages are definitely a way of advertising and other things, because subliminal messages and supraliminal message can both be used for same reasons. They just work a bit differently with the mind.
So now we're just going to be, basically for the rest of the video, we're going to be talking about subliminal messages. We'll be referring back to like the states of consciousness and supraliminal, but we're just going to be talking about this for the remainder of this video.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about subliminal and supraliminal messages as they are used for very similar reasons.
So we've talked a lot about subliminal messages, but I just want to basically let's just explain a bit more on how they work and how basically they're effective. So a lot of people say that with subliminal messages, it comes with repetition. And earlier we talked about basically like wiring or programming your brain, and that's basically a lot of people's theories and of how people use this way of advertising or way of pretty much brain control, mind control.
Yeah,
So-
or mind manipulation.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
It's technically that. If it's influencing something through subliminal techniques,
Yeah.
it's basically mind manipulation.
So that's the way this works basically on a larger scale is what they do is they basically like in the movies where they do the split second flashes, they do it multiple times and basically it wires your brain to associate certain things with other with things. So I was going to get into this later, but we'll just get into it now, then come back to something else. There was you probably heard of this. Basically, we're going to be talking about more the dark side of this.
So there's a conspiracy about subliminal messages, and we're just going to go into that a bit more.
So I don't remember when, but I think it was around the 60s or the 50s. We'll put up on the screen if I'm wrong, but they held an experiment called MK Ultra.
It's a CIA experiment.
Yeah, so CIA. This only came out quite recently, like properly came out quite recently, and people are talking about it more now than they did in the past. But so this is actually subliminal messages, but to some extent it is because it's about mind manipulation and using certain techniques. Because also subliminal messaging or subliminal stimuli basically is just conveying any sort of belief or perception onto someone through subliminal ways, so like to the unconscious, so people aren't aware of it. And what they did in this MK Ultra experiment, they did it on people. Basically, they tortured them. They did certain experiments like making them like do certain things, like like listen to certain things, and basically to get repetition and to wire their brain to associate certain things. And basically, it was to when basically they did something like basically like set a message, it would basically trigger something in the brain eventually because of all the repetition. It triggers something in the brain and it makes your body, without you being aware, without you having any control, do that action. So it's pretty much like like you flick your fingers and you have control over someone.
Yeah,
They did experiments.
and this only came to work with repetition. The point of MK Ultra was to basically learn how to be able to manipulate the mind.
Now, whether they had enough information, and they're definitely doing things similar to that now. We just don't know about it, but they will come out in the future most likely. But with this thing, they did. We're not sure if they learned and they're putting this into action. But there's definitely a lot of weird stuff going around this topic, and that's why subliminal messages also gets put in the category of conspiracy theories, Illuminati type things.
Yeah, so there are a lot of examples of subliminal messages. They're more supraliminal, but in some cases they're subliminal. So you
We'll
may
put
have
around the same topic.
Yeah. So you may have heard or even seen some videos on on Disney movies. They're very known for around this topic, for like putting in basically very inappropriate or very maybe even demonic or just very bad
And strange, something you
and
wouldn't
strange,
expect from someone like that.
messages in the movies. It could be something that just looks like it could be, I don't know, it could be someone like, I don't know, it could be a scene that looks like something really bad, even though it wasn't intended, even though it probably was.
There's many videos you can just watch, like a top 5. Like
We
things.
probably won't show any in the video because it's probably not appropriate for the video. But there are some very bad things.
There's also things like we talked about, split second things on the screen, and a lot of people have found this. I remember like a few years ago, my dad told me that there was this like video he saw on Facebook of someone basically he paused it at a specific time and he paused it at the perfect time where there was this really inappropriate thing put in like a kids movie like Cinderella or something like that, or I think it was Aladdin. So it's weird that they would try to do this, and that's why a lot of people straight away link it with conspiracy, and a lot of people automatically dismiss it because it's linked with this because of that. But unfortunately, it actually does have a lot to do with it.
So there are a lot of examples that are just really like reaching for it. Some of it is just they're trying. Like if you try hard enough, you might find something that kind of looks bad, But a lot of the cases aren't actually maybe subliminal messages, but subliminal messages, but a lot are. And if you think why would they put a message in? Well, Disney is a very big corporation. A lot of people see them to be this very evil company that has, if you go by the Illuminati, and that basically all the high in charge are basically trying to influence, manipulate us in whatever agenda they have through these movies. They're basically in these movies they put these things, and that's why, because they have an evil agenda. If you believe it like that, it's because they have an evil agenda. And there are lots of different cases. There's also this other thing. It doesn't have too much. There's not much evidence supporting this. There are in some cases, but it is basically the only evidence as that I know is basically just these examples that you see in the film or whatever. And there's also some in songs and in music videos. You see these in a recent Justin Bieber video, or maybe not recent, but in one of his music videos, he had some things in the background that are related to like something very bad. I'm not exactly sure.
Demonic stuff, and there's also like these Katy Perry and Taylor Swift music video. It's really weird. It could just be me, but think for what you
want.
But yeah, decide for yourself.
There's this thing called backmasking. So I haven't actually gone too far into this, but as far as I know, it's basically when you see there's a song, and when you play it backwards, you hear some
demonic message or some
you hear
whatever
some message. And you may think, how could this influence, like you don't hear it backwards, so how could it influence your behavior? Because that's what subliminal messages are intended to do.
We just talked about how subconscious, or like with your unconscious mind, you interpret things differently,
and
over the long run, it does affect your behavior in many cases.
And we don't know that much about the unconscious mind. There's still lots to be found out. So whether you believe in the backmasking or not, that's definitely a possibility. But I'm not really 100% sure in everything if the subliminal messages, but there are a lot of very suspicious and things that really spark my curiosity, because a lot of things that just very not normal.
And how many coincidences can there be before you
start noticing it?
You start noticing these things. Anyway, there's also a lot of things in advertising. Like, we can show you some examples where this doesn't necessarily have anything bad about it, but they're just doing it basically for you to buy their product. So it is illegal, like we said, but there's been an example with KFC associating their like burgers with like money to make you want to buy it or something like that. I'll show you a photo here, and there's many things like that. And there's also things just like putting something in the background, like in a show on purpose. Like, we're just watching a compilation of like top 20 shows or movies that use subliminal messages for whatever reason, not necessarily a bad reason in this case, but they basically put something like in the background basically to make the thing more interesting, or so you subconsciously start thinking about that because they know it's going to like basically affect the how the movie is interpreted.
Yeah, there was this show, it's called How I Met Your Mother, you may have heard of it, and there was this episode, I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but I'll put the name on screen now. And basically it was something very bad happened at the episode. Like, basically someone's father died or mother died, someone's family member died, and how they got up to that point is basically they had weird numbers during the show. So like, say someone was in the bar and you could just see somewhere hidden, you could see a 50, and in another scene you see a 49, and it would count down like that all the way to 1.
And when it hit 1, that's when the bad moment happens.
Yeah, and that's a subliminal message. Basically, if you're talking about the consciousness and stuff, and how it works, like how your unconscious mind works, is basically it's meant to affect, like give you like anxiety and stuff like that, because you see the countdown and it gets you like waiting, and you know, gives you stress.
Yeah, whatever reason is for.
Yeah, that's the said reason. So we've done a lot of rambling on about subliminal messages and examples and all these things. I think it's time to conclude. And we've talked about the examples. We've talked about the conscious mind, and I also just want to talk about how, since subliminal messages are seen in so many cases, whether it's advertising, whether it's movies, it could be literally anything.
It doesn't have to be deliberate.
Yeah, it could. The subliminal messages are everywhere, and if you go by the concept that everything that our unconscious mind gets, which is like through subliminal messages, affects our actions, we could literally be living in this reality where, you know, just everything's happening because of all these distractions or subliminal messages around us. And that's why people say when they're in nature, less distractions, they feel much different. It's because they just
their mind is clear.
That's why they say do meditation to, you know, get away from all these different distractions such as subliminal messages. Since they're everywhere, they can manipulate you, and it makes you like. That's why with things like say a new product that's coming out, say a new mobile phone, everyone in school's having it, and all of a sudden you want it. Through all these subliminal messages, every repetition of seeing it, it trains you to want it. Where even though that's not subliminal, it could be superliminal. Even though it's not subliminal, it trains your mind to want to have these things, and it just changes how you act everywhere.
Your perception of reality. Also, before we say anything further, I just want to say, with advertising, I remember this from somewhere. For you to start thinking about it properly, consciously,
a TV commercial,
you basically have to see it something like 9 times, I'm pretty sure.
7 or 9 times.
Yeah, and for it to work. So there has been studies to actually manipulate people, you know, so...
Yeah, whether it's subliminal messaging or just showing someone something, repetition makes it your perception of reality, and it can basically change how you live. So that's why people think meditation is very good. I personally think it's a good thing. I don't do it much myself, but when I do it, it definitely is working.
And things with like breathing, because breathing's unconscious, right? We don't think about it when we breathe. You know, it just comes to us naturally.
It's a pre-conscious, because you can think about it, but it's coming naturally.
But if you focus on it, you know, a lot more benefit can come from it. But anyway, hopefully you liked this video and you learned a lot, because we have been recording the video for quite a while, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you can do further research as always, because this has only been from like 4 days of our research, you know.
If we do a video like this in the future, it'll be way less messy. We'll get the point across much easier.
So yeah, that's got to sum it up. Thank you for watching, and see you next video.
See you next video.